I am delighted to speak with you all today about the Broad Pragmatic Studies funding opportunity. So I'm going to dive into the nuts and bolts of this PFA. For this funding opportunity, PCORI seeks investigator-initiated applications addressing patient-centered comparative clinical effectiveness research, or CER, that meet the scope and intent of this funding opportunity. Applicants also have the option to choose to align their proposed research with PCORI's research project agenda topic themes and/or special areas of emphasis that are noted within the funding opportunity, which you'll hear about in a little bit. To be considered responsive, applications are required to describe research that compares at least two or more alternative approaches. These approaches must have evidence of efficacy and/or be in widespread use. And listed on this slide are potential areas of focus for the proposed research. So applicants may choose one or more of these areas of focus in their letter of intent and applications. And in the coming slides, we're actually going to walk through some examples of what constitutes a responsive letter of intent under these areas of focus. First, we have our direct comparison of clinical options. So here, approaches may address diagnostic methods, screening strategies, interventions for prevention, treatment, or management of a disease, and/or strategies to improve the healthcare system. Another area of focus could be for features of healthcare systems. So these are approaches that may address alternative features of healthcare systems. So for instance, workforce, technologies, incentive structures, healthcare service delivery designs, established health system policies that optimize the outcomes and efficiency of patient care with the potential for sustained impact and replication both within and across these healthcare systems. I mentioned incentives, so only non-financial incentives are acceptable for providers. And in addition, research with an intervention arm that solely involves the introduction of a community health worker, so CHW, peer and/or patient navigator in one arm of the study design is considered low priority. We actually have a frequently asked questions that's linked within the funding opportunity for additional information. As it pertains to different population groups, if you're proposing a study that's focused on a specific population, applicants must describe the rationale for the chosen population, such as disease incidence, prevalence or burden, particular evidence gaps, or differences in healthcare delivery or health outcomes for that population. Applicants should also address how the proposed research will be generalizable and representative beyond that specific called out research population. And also, if an intervention with documented efficacy or effectiveness in one or more population groups is proposed to be adapted for other groups based on stakeholder engagement or other methods, then PCORI expects that most of the proposed time and budget focus on actually establishing that comparative clinical effectiveness rather than adapting and validating the intervention. Related to health communication research, approaches may address shared decision-making, communicating uncertainty and risk, and communicating among care teams, particularly those that are caring for patients with complex and/or chronic conditions who often interact with many different healthcare professionals across multiple settings. Very important research that's focused on the development, testing, and validation of new decision aids and tools or clinical prognostication tools will be considered non-responsive, and you will hear me say this again later in the presentation. And then finally, our final area of focus is comparison of dissemination and implementation strategies. So approaches here may address comparisons of efficacious and/or commonly used dissemination or implementation strategies for increasing the uptake and sustainment of evidence-based interventions or strategies for the de-implementation of practices that have not been proven to be effective and are possibly harmful. In these circumstances, clinical effectiveness outcomes are required. And, as a note, strict implementation studies or dissemination studies that do not compare evidence-based strategies or include effectiveness outcomes will not be considered responsive for this opportunity, nor will studies focused on the development of research methods. PCORI regularly offers both broad and topically focused funding opportunities to support comparative clinical effectiveness research studies of varying sizes and types. Through this broad funding opportunity, PCORI seeks proposals on any topic generated by the CER community. In addition, and I mentioned this earlier, PCORI's research project agenda includes a set of topic themes, which are interrelated research areas that encompass healthcare issues facing large numbers of people in the United States. And these themes are intentionally broad and intersectional, and they enable us to solicit comparative clinical effectiveness research projects that address patient-centered needs and encourage creative approaches by applicants to address these evidence gaps. In letters of intent and applications, applicants must designate the primary and, as applicable, secondary and/or tertiary topic themes with which their research most closely aligns. Applicants may also select NA if their research does not align with any listed theme. And also, this just kind of helps to navigate the review pathway. It doesn't confer any competitive benefit to select one topic theme versus another. We also have our 3 special areas of emphasis that are listed within this funding opportunity. And I'm going to turn the floor over to my colleagues in a minute to talk about each of them. But the goal of calling out these special areas of emphasis is to encourage submissions to these priority areas, not to limit submissions to these topics only. And there is no additional funding that is allotted to these areas. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Katie to talk through this first special area of emphasis.
Thank you, Allison. My name is Katie Sturgeon. I'm an Associate Director within the Comparative Clinical Effectiveness Research Division here at PCORI. And I'm going to provide some information on the special area of emphasis titled Addressing Obesity. Now, PCORI is interested in supporting high-quality, patient-centered research to study the comparative clinical effectiveness of interventions that address obesity treatment and/or management. This could include evidence-based intensive lifestyle interventions, anti-obesity medications, endoscopic procedures, and bariatric surgery, and certainly as well as the combination of these approaches as an intervention as appropriate. Of note, interventions for obesity prevention are not responsive to this SAE. Now, in both research and clinical practice, weight reduction and resolution of comorbidities have historically been centered as the primary measures of success for obesity interventions. So for this SAE, research evaluating a clinically meaningful, objective, and obesity-related primary outcome is highly desired. For context, an obesity-related outcome may look like weight change, weight maintenance, or other clinical health outcomes that are relevant to disease comorbidities and complications. Lastly, PCORI encourages studies with a follow-up period of at least 12 months from baseline for primary outcomes. Also interested in sample sizes that will allow for powered examinations and meaningful inferences about the heterogeneity of treatment effects. We encourage populations with pre-specified clinical profiles, such as severity of obesity or related health conditions or comorbidities, as well as populations with pre-specified obesity treatment profiles, such as new users of intensive lifestyle interventions, anti-obesity medications, bariatric surgery, or prior users of intensive lifestyle interventions, anti-obesity medications, bariatric surgery, and those with or without a treatment response. We also encourage study designs that include multi-center randomized controlled trials and sequential multiple assignment randomized trials or SMART trials to assess adaptive interventions. Thanks, and I'll turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Katie. So my name is Laura Esmail. I'm an Associate Director in the Comparative Clinical Effectiveness Research Department as well. And it's my pleasure to provide an overview of the menopause special area of emphasis. So PCORI is interested in supporting high-quality patient-centered research to study the comparative clinical effectiveness, including the safety of interventions that address menopausal symptoms and or optimize the health and quality of life for peri and or postmenopausal women. These studies should generate rigorous evidence to support health decision-making for patients, caregivers, clinicians, payers, purchasers, and other stakeholders. Of particular interest are large multi-site randomized controlled trials studying hormonal or non-hormonal pharmacologic and non-pharmacologic treatments, including questions related to treatment dose, timing, duration, and route of administration, as well as comparisons of health system or community level interventions to promote evidence-based patient-centered care. Although not required, studies focused on the following populations are encouraged: premature or early menopause, surgically or medically induced menopause, patients with severe vasomotor symptoms, primary or ovarian insufficiency, and or women who are at risk for or survivors of breast and other cancers. Thank you very much, and I will now pass the mic to Heather Williamson.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Williamson, and I am a Senior Program Officer at PCORI. And today I will provide a brief overview of the special area of emphasis titled Improving Care Delivery for Individuals with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, or IDD. So despite the availability of evidence-based treatments for many conditions, barriers to accessing healthcare remain for individuals with IDD. Evidence gaps include a lack of data on the most appropriate interventions to understand which models of care will improve quality of care, access to care, and care navigation for individuals with IDD. So we are interested in studies that compare systems-level care delivery strategies to improve health outcomes for people with IDD with this special area of emphasis. Strategies could include interventions to improve access to care, quality of care, care navigation across different care settings, care transitions across the lifespan, and use of the IDD workforce, caregiver, or technology in care delivery. The primary outcome should be identified as important to people with IDD. And we are especially interested in comparators that will improve patient-centered outcomes, including quality of life, community participation, healthcare utilization, and patient-centered economic costs, such as taking time off of work to access care or traveling great distances to access care.